The restaurant was bustling with laughter and clinking glasses when the doors swung open. No one noticed the three men until their shadows loomed over the lone woman at the corner table. Their smirks carried arrogance, their movements dripping with menace. In 15 seconds, the warm hum of chatter would fall silent, and the men would realize they had chosen the wrong woman to corner because she wasn't just anyone. She was Navy. The restaurant was the kind of place that lived in whispers of amber light and muted laughter. Its walls were painted in earthy tones, the glow of low-hanging lamps spilling across polished wooden tables like pools of honey. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying trays with an effortless grace born of repetition. Weaving between couples, late-night diners, and clusters of friends leaning in over their glasses. It was later than most people would linger over dinner on a weekday, yet here it was, still alive with the warmth of conversation, the clinking of forks against plates, and the occasional burst of laughter that cut through the hushed atmosphere before fading back into the hum of voices. In the far corner, half hidden by a pillar, sat a woman alone. She didn't blend in, though she seemed to try. A plate of untouched pasta sat before her, the steam long gone, while her glass of water reflected the lamplight with a crystal sheen. She wasn't fidgeting with her phone or absently scrolling like so many did when dining solo. No. She sat, with a stillness that felt deliberate, one elbow resting lightly on the table, her hand loosely holding the stem of her glass, her head tilted slightly downward as though she were deep in thought, but her eyes told another story. Sharp, alert. Those eyes missed nothing. They skimmed over the shifting crowd, the waiter bending to set a basket of bread at a nearby table, the man at the bar adjusting his tie as though to impress the woman beside him, the young couple in the corner whispering secrets too softly for anyone else to hear. She saw it all, cataloging, assessing, without betraying the smallest flicker of emotion. She looked like an ordinary woman to the untrained eye, mid-30s, shoulder-length dark hair tied back neatly, dressed in a simple black blouse and fitted jeans. No jewelry glimmered at her wrists or throat. No makeup beyond a natural touch. But there was something about her posture. Something quiet yet unyielding, like a coiled spring concealed beneath calm waters that hinted she was far from ordinary. The waitress had sensed it too. She had glanced once, then again, at the woman while filling water glasses. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way her gaze didn't wander aimlessly but swept with intent, as if she was waiting for something. And then, the doors opened. The cold draft came first, chasing away the comfortable warmth in a single gust. 3 men stepped in, their voices louder than the ambient chatter before the door had even swung shut. They didn't belong here, where the other patrons spoke in soft tones and polite laughter. These 3 brought a brashness that shattered the illusion of peace. One wore a leather jacket with patches fraying at the seams. The second sported a cap pulled low over his brow. And the third, clearly the tallest, had the kind of swagger that came with a cruel grin plastered permanently across his face. Their boots thudded against the hardwood floor, heavy, unrestrained, announcing themselves without apology. The hostess offered a polite greeting, but they brushed past her without so much as a nod. Their heads turned, scanning, hunting, and then they saw her. She hadn't looked up. At least, not obviously, but she knew the moment their attention landed on her. The energy shifted, the air thickened with the kind of weight that made strangers instinctively lower their voices. The woman's hand tightened ever so slightly on her glass, a movement so subtle it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. The men leaned toward each other, exchanging low remarks that drew sly chuckles from their throats. The tallest one, the one with the grin, tilted his head toward her corner. His friends followed his gaze, and their smirks widened. She was sitting alone. That was all they needed. They didn't care about the set of her shoulders, the deliberate stillness, or the razor-sharp focus hidden behind her calm eyes. They saw only what they wanted: prey. Their approach was slow, deliberate, as though they wanted the entire restaurant to feel their presence. Conversations faltered at nearby tables, whispers spreading like ripples in water. The waitress, who had earlier studied the lone woman, now froze behind the counter, clutching her notepad a little too tightly. But the woman did not move. Her fork hovered over her plate, her attention fixed not on them but on the meal before her. She twirled a single strand of pasta around the prongs, her composure unshaken. Her breathing remained steady. If she felt the danger drawing closer, she gave no sign of it. The first man, leather jacket, walked a step ahead of the others, his hand dragging along the back of a chair as he passed. his rings tapping loudly against the wood. He liked the sound. He liked how it made heads turn. The second man, the one in the cap, stuffed his hands into his pockets, his eyes narrowing with a predator's gleam. He muttered something under his breath, and the men chuckled again, careless of who heard them. The third, the tall one with the grin, slowed his pace as they neared her table. His eyes raked over her with the kind of entitled ownership that made onlookers shift uncomfortably in their seats. He licked his lips as though savoring the thought of what came next. Still, she did not look up. Her fork reached her lips, and she ate, as though their approach was no more significant than the ticking of a distant clock. The tension in the room coiled tighter. Every patron knew what was coming, though no one dared intervene. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their eyes flicking between the men and the woman, whispering silent prayers that someone would step in, that someone would stop this before it began. But no one moved. The men drew closer. 10 steps. 5. They were at her table now, their shadows cutting across her plate. "Evenin', sweetheart," the tall one drawled, his grin widening. His voice oozed with false charm, a blade wrapped in velvet. "You all alone tonight?" She set down her fork gently, the faintest clink against porcelain. Her hand remained near her plate, calm, steady, though her eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, finally lifted. For a fraction of a second, she met his gaze, just long enough for him to see something he didn't understand flicker there, something that made the grin falter, just slightly, though he quickly forced it back into place. His friends chuckled, emboldened, mistaking her silence for fear. "Looks like she don't talk much." Leather Jacket sneered, leaning one hand against the back of her chair. "Don't worry, darling. We'll keep you company." The man in the cap smirked, tilting his head as he added, "Yeah, wouldn't want such a pretty thing sittin' here all by herself. Dangerous world out there." Her eyes slid from one man to the next, measured, calculating. Without a word, every muscle in the room tightened with anticipation. The other diners barely breathed, frozen between fear and fascination. They didn't know who she was, but they sensed it, the shift in the air, the stillness that came not from weakness but from control. The men, however, didn't see it. They saw only what they wanted to see, and they leaned closer.
The tall one with the grin leaned closer, his hand dropping heavily on the table as if to cage her in. His fingers drummed idly against the wood, each tap deliberate, a countdown in a language only he thought he understood. His friends fanned out around her, boxing her in on 3 sides. "You're too quiet, sweetheart," he said, tilting his head. His grin showed teeth, all charm rotted at the edges. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" The woman sat still, her eyes fixed, not on him but on the condensation sliding down her glass of water. The droplets gathered, joined, and fell into the growing ring of dampness beneath. She watched as if she had all the time in the world. Her silence unsettled him. He wanted fear. He wanted the wide eyes, the trembling lip, the nervous laugh that told him the game was his to play. Instead, she gave him nothing. Leather Jacket snorted, leaning an elbow over the back of her chair so close his breath stirred a strand of her hair. "She's shy. Don't worry, baby, we'll make you feel welcome." The man in the cap leaned in too, his voice a low, oily murmur. "Bet you taste even better than that pasta." His hand reached toward her plate, plucking a piece of bread, and biting into it with exaggerated relish. Crumbs scattered across the table. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Forks hovered mid-air. A woman at the bar whispered sharply to her date, who shook his head, urging her to stay seated. The waitress froze halfway between tables, clutching her tray like a shield. No one dared interfere. The woman's chest rose and fell evenly, measured breaths that betrayed not the slightest quiver. Her gaze finally lifted, sweeping over each man in turn. Her eyes weren't wild or angry. They were sharp, cool, dissecting them like a puzzle. The tall man leaned closer, his grin widening in defiance of the faint unease creeping up his spine. "Don't play hard to get, sweetheart. We're just," his words cut short, because in that instant, his hand shot out, fingers curling around her forearm. It was meant to be a claim, a declaration that she was trapped. Instead, it was the spark that struck the powder keg. Her movement was so sudden, so fluid, that no one quite saw how it began. One moment, his hand gripped her wrist. The next, his face was crashing toward the table. The sound of bone striking wood cracked through the silence, his breath whooshing out in shock. Before the other two could process what happened, she was already in motion. Her chair screeched back as she rose, her body flowing with a precision too sharp, too refined to be anything but trained. Leather Jacket's arm was still draped across her chair. She seized it, twisting it upward in a snap that made him howl. His knees buckled as she forced his arm behind his back, shoving him face first against the pillar beside her table. The man in the cap staggered back in shock, the piece of bread still half chewed in his mouth. For a split second, he froze, then he lunged. His hand shot toward her throat. Clumsy with panic, she sidestepped, her body turning with surgical efficiency. Her elbow drove into his ribs with a force that sent the air rushing out of him in a ragged gasp. Before he could double over, she caught his wrist, pivoted, and slammed his arm against the edge of the table. The crack of impact made glasses jump and one shatter against the floor. The restaurant had erupted into chaos. Chairs scraped as patrons stumbled back, gasping, covering their mouths. Someone shouted to call the police. The waitress ducked behind the counter, her wide eyes peeking over the edge, and still, the woman moved. The tall one was staggering upright, his grin gone, blood trickling from his nose. He roared and lunged, his size giving him the illusion of advantage. But she met him halfway, her palm snapping upward into his chin. His teeth clacked shut with a sickening sound, his head snapping back. Disoriented, he stumbled into a nearby table, sending plates of half-eaten food crashing to the floor. Leather Jacket tried to twist free of her hold, snarling through clenched teeth. She tightened her grip, forcing him down further, until his cheek pressed hard against the pillar. Then, with a sharp pivot, she released him just long enough to drive her knee into his midsection. He folded like paper, crumpling to the floor. Cap recovered enough to throw a wild punch, fueled by rage rather than precision. She ducked beneath it, her body lowering with controlled grace. Rising swiftly, she drove her shoulder into his chest, sending him sprawling backward over a chair. The chair toppled with a crash, his body tangled in its legs. 15 seconds, that was all it took. When the storm ended, the restaurant was frozen in stunned silence. The three men lay scattered across the floor. The tall one sat slumped against a broken table, blood staining his teeth. Leather Jacket groaned on his side, clutching his stomach with both arms. Cap struggled to untangle himself from the chair, his breath ragged, eyes wide with disbelief. The woman stood above them, her blouse unrumpled, her breathing steady. She hadn't broken a sweat. Her eyes swept the room briefly, as if checking not for admiration or fear, but for threats, ensuring the storm had truly passed. Patrons stared, wide-eyed, as though they had witnessed something unreal. Forks clinked softly against plates that no one remembered setting down. Somewhere, a phone buzzed on a tabletop, the sound jarringly mundane against the backdrop of destruction. A child whispered too loudly, "Mommy, is she a superhero?" The mother shushed him quickly, pulling him close. The woman did not answer. She simply reached for her glass, lifting it with steady fingers. She took a slow sip of water, her eyes never leaving the men who writhed on the floor. It was as if nothing had happened. The silence stretched. Seconds ticked by, thick and heavy. Then the whispers began. "My God," someone muttered from the bar. "Did you see how fast?" another stammered. She didn't flinch," a man said, voice trembling. The waitress crept out from behind the counter, her hands shaking as she picked up the phone to call the police. Her eyes kept flicking to the woman, awe and disbelief mingling with fear. The men groaned, broken but not beaten enough to rise again. They clutched at their injuries, glaring with a mix of pain and humiliation. Their arrogance, once loud enough to fill the restaurant, was gone, shattered alongside glass and splintered chairs. The woman set her glass down gently, the faint clink echoing louder than any word. She lowered herself back into her chair, smooth, composed, as if reclaiming her place in the calm she had never truly left. Her fork slid through the pasta again, twirling neatly, a simple gesture that seemed impossibly normal after the chaos around No one spoke above a whisper. She had dismantled 3 men in 15 seconds, and then just like that returned to her meal. As if violence was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. As if she had expected it all along.
For a long, breathless moment, the restaurant was utterly still. The air smelled faintly of spilled wine, broken glass, and the sour temps of fear. Chairs lay toppled, plates shattered, silverware scattered across the floor like fallen weapons. And there, at the center of it all, were the 3 men. The tall one slumped against a shattered table leg, his head bowed, blood dribbling in a dark ribbon from his split lip. Leather jacket writhed on his side, his arm cradled awkwardly against his chest, his face twisted in agony. The one in the cap groaned, tangled in a chair he hadn't yet managed to untangle himself from, his breaths short and ragged, as though each inhale reminded him of a rib that had given way under her strike. Their swagger, their laughter, their cocky bravado wit was gone. What replaced it was shock, humiliation, pain, and silence, until, all at once, the room erupted. Applause broke, first hesitant, unsure, then built into a ripple of cheers. Some patrons clapped with relief, others with awe, as though they had witnessed not just a fight, but a performance of something rare, something breathtaking. A woman at the bar laughed nervously, raising her glass toward the lone woman, as if toasting her. At another table, a man whispered furiously into his phone, likely recounting every detail to a friend who would never believe him. Yet just as many did not cheer. They whispered instead, leaning in close to one another, their voices filled with disbelief. Did you see how fast she was? She dropped them like it was nothing. 3 of them. She didn't even look scared. The waitress, still pale, fumbled with the phone behind the counter, finally connecting to the authorities. Her voice shook as she gave the address. Yes, 3 men attacked a woman. No, they're the ones on the floor. Yes, she handled it. Just come quickly. The woman herself, the storm at the center of all this chaos, sat back in her chair, calm, unflinching. She twirled her fork into her pasta and ate as though the last 15 seconds had been nothing more than an interruption, a nuisance, easily dealt with. Her eyes stayed lowered to her plate, her breathing steady, but her stillness, more than the violence itself, unsettled the crowd, because no one who had just fought 3 men should have looked that composed at a corner table. A man in his 50s couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. He leaned toward the waitress as she passed, whispering loudly enough for others nearby to hear. Who is she? The question spread instantly, bouncing from table to table. Who was she? Where had she learned to move like that? Why hadn't she panicked? It was the bartender who answered, polishing a glass with deliberate slowness, his eyes fixed on her, as though piecing together a puzzle. He'd seen her type before, though rarely, and never in a place like this. She's Navy, he said, casually, the words slipping out with the weight of certainty. The whispers swelled into a murmur, disbelief mixing with dawning comprehension. A veteran. It explained everything: the composure, the efficiency, the quiet eyes that had measured the room the moment she sat down. She wasn't just trained, she was forged. The patrons glanced back at her with new eyes, no longer seeing merely a woman dining alone, but a soldier who carried battles in her silence. And as the whispers grew, she felt them, though she didn't react. Her fork lifted another bite, her focus still locked on her plate, but in her mind, threads of memory stirred, unbidden, dragging her backward into the places she had long since buried. A flash of desert sun, blinding and merciless, beating down on parched earth. She remembered the taste of dust in her mouth, the weight of a rifle pressed into her shoulder. Orders barked sharp and quick overcomes, her body moving before her mind had time to question. The chaos of gunfire around her had never unraveled her. She had learned early that panic got people killed, calm saved them. Calm let you see what others missed. Discipline was not a choice, it was survival. Another flash, the darkness of the ocean, endless and suffocating. The claustrophobic steel belly of a ship, the smell of oil and metal, the creak of pressure that came with every dive. Her commanding officer's voice echoing, "You are only as strong as your calm." Remember that. She had remembered. She had drilled it into her bones until it was no longer thought, but instinct. Calm in the storm, calm in the face of death, calm when others broke. Then, another. The heat of training fields, mud caked to her skin, bruises blooming across her ribs, the endless cycle of drills until muscle memory replaced hesitation. Strike. Move, control, finish. The body became a machine. The mind became steel. Her fork clinked against her plate again, snapping her back into the present. She exhaled slowly, returning to the dimly lit restaurant, the gawking eyes, the murmurs of Navy that passed from mouth to mouth. Yes, Navy, but the title meant little to her now. It wasn't the name that had saved her tonight. It was the years of discipline, of broken down days and rebuilt nights, of forging control in the furnace of chaos. That was what had kept her calm when three men thought they'd cornered prey. A patron leaned toward another, shaking his head in disbelief. I've never seen anything like it. She didn't even stand until it started, like she knew it was coming. Another whispered, she must have been in combat. No one moves like that unless they've seen real fights. The woman ignored them. Their words were only echoes of what she had already lived. The groans of the three men on the floor dragged attention back to the wreckage. Leather Jacket rolled onto his stomach, his breath wheezing. Cap finally freed himself from the chair, crawling backward until his back hit the wall. The tall one, still dazed and bleeding, spat a crimson streak onto the floor, his pride more broken than his bones. Crazy, bitch, he muttered hoarsely, though there was no strength behind the insult. His voice trembled, stripped of the arrogance that once fueled it. The woman didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all. He no longer mattered. The sound of sirens cut through the air distance at first, then swelling closer. Blue and red light flickered through the restaurant's front windows, washing the walls in color. The murmurs died down again, replaced by a collective anticipation. The police burst in moments later, voices sharp, authoritative, commanding the room. Nobody moved. What happened here? Dozens of hands pointed instantly not at her, but at the three groaning men. They attacked her. She didn't do anything. They started it. She saved herself. You should have seen it. The officers moved quickly, cuffing the men with little resistance. Their protests were weak, drowned beneath the authoritative commands of law enforcement. One officer, tall and broad-shouldered, paused as his gaze landed on the woman. She still sat calmly, sipping her water, untouched by the chaos around her. His eyes narrowed, recognition flickering there. You, he said softly, almost more to himself than to her. Haven't seen you in a while. Her eyes lifted to him briefly. Unbothered, officer. He gave the faintest nod, respect hidden in the small gesture. Before turning to haul one of the men upright, the restaurant buzzed again as the authorities dragged the attackers out. The applause had faded into something quieter now, not excitement, not shock, but reverence. The kind of reverence people give to storms once they've passed, knowing how small they are in comparison. The woman returned to her plate, bite after bite. Silent, alone again. But the whispers would never leave the restaurant, not tonight, not ever. The restaurant doors swung open with a rush of cold night air, carrying with it the shrill echo of sirens that were now silenced outside. The police filed in uniforms, sharp, boots heavy, hands poised on belts heavy with authority. Their presence swallowed the room, but it was unnecessary. The fight had long since ended. Three men lay broken and humiliated on the floor, groaning like wounded animals. The officers wasted no time to bent over the tall one, yanking his blood-streaked arms behind his back. He swore through swollen lips, but the words came out muffled, pitiful. Another officer dragged Leather Jacket upright. The man staggered, his bravado replaced with wide, terrified eyes. The one in the cap tried to resist, jerking his arm back weakly. But a swift twist of a policeman's wrist sent him face first against the wall. Cuffs clicked into place, one after another, like the hammering of nails sealing a coffin. The crowd watched in silence, some satisfied, some uneasy, all caught between relief and awe. Through it all, the woman remained seated. She hadn't moved since the fight ended. Her plate was half empty, her fork poised neatly on its edge. Her back rested against the chair, shoulders squared, posture perfect, as though she had been carved from the stillness of stone. The storm had passed, and she had become again what she was before it began, calm, unreadable, untouchable. One officer, tall and graying at the temples, paused as his gaze swept across the room. His eyes landed on her, and recognition stirred. For a moment, the chaos around him seemed to fade. His jaw tightened, his breath drew in slow. He had seen those eyes before, sharp, steady, unshaken even in the face of hell. He remembered sand under his boots, the echo of commands over a radio, the unyielding figures who stood their ground when others faltered. She was one of them. He stepped closer, crouching slightly so his words wouldn't carry beyond her table. "You haven't changed," he said quietly. Her eyes lifted, meeting his with the same calm composure that had silenced 3 men and an entire restaurant. There was no flicker of recognition on her face, but she inclined her head slightly. "Officer," a single word, neutral, controlled. He gave her a small nod, not of greeting, but of respect. Not many could have done what she had just done. Fewer still could have done it with such restraint. He straightened, his duty pulling him back toward the cuffed men who now shuffled out under the weight of humiliation and steel. As the attackers were dragged toward the doors, the restaurant stirred again, patrons shifted in their seats, whispers rising like a tide. "Good riddance." She barely moved, like it was nothing. Did you see the way he looked at her? Like he knew her. The officers escorted the 3 men outside, the sound of their protests fading into the night until the heavy thud of the closing door sealed the room in silence once more. The flashing lights outside painted brief, fleeting shadows against the walls, then dimmed as the cruisers pulled away. The restaurant exhaled. The weight that had pressed down on every chest lifted, though unease lingered in the air like smoke. After a fire, slowly, carefully, life began to return to the room. A chair was righted, a fork clattered back onto a plate. Conversations resumed in fragments, stilted and broken, as though no one quite knew how to pick up the pieces of normalcy. Yet normalcy was what she embodied. The woman lifted her fork again, twirling another bite of pasta, her expression unchanged. To her, the night had not been broken. To her, this was just another interruption, handled swiftly and decisively, then discarded like ashes blown from a flame. She chewed slowly, calmly, each motion deliberate, her glass lifted, the water cool against her lips. The faintest ripple trembled across its surface as she set it down. But her hand had not shaken. The waitress approached timidly, her hands still trembling, as she gathered shards of broken glass from a nearby table. Her eyes darted toward the woman, awe and fear mingling in equal measure. She wanted to say something, "Thank you," maybe, or "I'm sorry," or even "Who are you?" But the words died on her tongue. The woman didn't need them. She never did. At another table, a man in his 30s leaned toward his companions, whispering, "I'll never forget this." She didn't brag, didn't even smile. She just ended it. A woman responded in a hushed voice, "That's what real strength looks like." Their words rippled outward, carried on the hush of the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others only stared at her, silent, as though afraid that speaking her name might break the spell. But she ignored them all. She finished the last bite of her meal, set her fork down neatly, and wiped her mouth with the folded napkin at her side. No rush, no sign of urgency, just composure. Reaching into her pocket, she drew out her wallet. From it, she pulled a few crisp bills and placed them carefully on the table. Enough to cover the meal. Enough to cover the broken glass and the mess left behind. More than enough. She stood, the chair legs scraping softly against the wood floor. The sound drew every eye in the room. Her figure was not imposing, not outwardly remarkable. Yet when she straightened to her full height, there was something unshakable in her bearing. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, her stride purposeful but unhurried. She walked to the counter, her steps silent against the wood, and paused long enough to meet the waitress's gaze. For the briefest second, the young woman thought she might speak. She hoped she would, but instead, the woman offered only the faintest nod, a gesture that carried the weight of reassurance. A silent command, "You're safe now," and then she turned. The door opened before her, the night air rushing in, the hum of the city beyond stretched wide. Swallowing the noise of the restaurant behind her, she stepped into the dark, the shadows embracing her as naturally as light. The door swung shut with a soft thud. Inside, silence lingered in her wake. Patrons stared at the empty doorway, as though expecting her to return, though none truly believed she would. The story of her presence had already taken root, threading through each of them like veins of fire and stone. She just walked out. Someone whispered, like nothing happened. Another replied. The bartender set down the glass he had been polishing and muttered, almost to himself, "That's strength. The kind that doesn't need to shout." The room fell quiet again, each person lost in their thoughts. They knew they had witnessed something unforgettable, something that would live long after the dishes were cleared and the floor swept clean. And though the restaurant would return to its usual rhythm after clinking glasses, soft conversations. The story would never leave it. It would linger in the walls, in the shadows, in the eyes of everyone who had seen her that night, the night the storm passed through, silent and unstoppable, the night they learned what true strength looked like. And somewhere in the city beyond, beneath the cover of night, the woman walked on, alone, unbothered, unseen, carrying with her not glory, not pride, but the quiet certainty of who she was. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their fear. Strength was not something she wore. It was something she lived, and it spoke for itself.